cultivating families is always a difficult thing. Being grounded in Christ is always a difficult thing in this world. Let me read you something that in our Give Back group we kind of try to follow. It's a little excerpt from
Shattered Dreams.
Shattered Dreams. I envision a revolution that creates a community of broken people united not by their problems or diagnoses, but by their hunger for God. I envision a revolution that frees people to fully participate in that community because they feel the safety of the gospel, that embraces people rather than judges them, that joins hurting folks more than advises them on how to feel better, that supernaturally equips people to pour life into one another. I envision a revolution that creates true community and transforms lives, a revolution that centers on an encounter with God that fills the soul with sheer delight. That is my vision, an encounter with God that creates community and transforms lives. And in the wellness ministry here at Holy Apostles, we're trying to take that seriously to the best of our abilities, where we try to provide a forum for us to be fed so we can have a little bit of our lives transformed and opened up with God's grace. So let's begin with a prayer, and then we'll into George and we'll be going. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, we pray and ask that you bless this evening, that you continue to give us strength to be open to your grace, that you fuel and ignite our hearts to respond with love and compassion in every aspect of our life. We ask that you bless George, that you open our hearts and our minds that we may receive what you have to say from him. This we ask in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I don't think George really needs a huge introduction. Last year, or was it last year, George? 2 years before, we had George talking about strengthening relationships, and we had a packed house, and we have a packed house tonight too as well. Last year we had people coming out of the back door there. But my prayer is, whatever church you go to, that we make time to stop and listen to people that have things to say. George has beautiful things to say. 2 things that I remember him saying that resonate with me. St. Isaac of Syria says a very powerful thing. He says, to truly know oneself is a greater miracle than raising the dead. And if we are created in God's image, to truly know ourselves is a very profound thing to consider. The other thing I remember him saying is, I don't know if he's going to talk about it today, but I like sharing what you share with me that inspired me. He created a little Gumby figure here, and I use this a lot. I got to tell you, thank you for this. And he has a heart here, and he has a question mark. And he says, every person's problem is because of this issue. And he calls it the value question, right, George?
Yep.
And the value question that everyone struggles with, that's in our heart, basically 2 things. Who am I? And how much am I worth? Something like that, right? And if we really knew who we are and how much we're worth to God, and we're his beloved, I think our world would not need negotiations in Congress today, or we wouldn't need too many things because we would living from that ground place. George, I want to thank you for inspiring me and blessing me with your stories, your life, your words, and your friendship. We welcome George, Papageorge. God bless you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, and Father Tom and his family have been great friends, and gracious to have me up here again with you guys. So greetings from the San Francisco Bay Area. Although for being a native Californian, we do a lot of our vacationing in the Northwest. We have friends that live in these little towns around Lake Washington. Bellevue. And they have a little pad out on the canal. And so my kids, like for us Californians, Lake Tahoe is where we do a lot of our boating. And so they know Tahoe as much as they know the canal. And so anyway, we're up there a lot. So and we love it. So it's nice to be back. Now, when it comes to the Seahawks and the 49ers, well, I don't think we're going to talk about that tonight at all. But humility is really good for us, so I'll take it for when it's forced on me like that. And greetings from my family. It's funny, my son just turned 11. He's our baby, and his name's Petros, and he's kind of in the mood lately to play hooky. Like, he just loves the thought of staying home from school. And so, some things they take up with his father just right away. So, and so he was begging to come on this trip, like crazy. And it's like, oh, sweetie, finish your math and go to school, and not this time. But he's been really interested in, anyway, I promise him one of these times I'm going to bring him, because he has, beyond playing hooky, I'm seeing this like interest, like he wants to go and hang out with Dad and see what I do and all that kind of stuff. So I'm stoked on yeah, totally cute, yeah. So greeting from Petros. By the way, baseball season just ended for us because we don't have a postseason this year. And so last weekend of the season, I have season tickets, and we had pretty good seats. And so it happened that the last Friday of the season, which was just a couple Fridays ago, was his birthday. It was his 11th birthday. And so I got 2 more seats next to us and took his best friend and Joey's dad, and who's my assistant coach in baseball, and we coached the boys together and all that. Anyway, I made my little Greek connections however I could, like to try to broker a deal. Got us, through this one connection, a pass onto the field for batting practice before the game. And 3 hours we're on the field, chatting, kicking back in the dugout. It was the coolest time ever. And then when it was time for everybody to leave, they had what they call Willie Mack Award, where Willie McCovey, the old giant from the 1960s, gives this award to the beloved giant of that year. The team votes for it. And everybody's being ushered off, and we just I don't know if Greeks play dumb really well, but these Greeks do, and we just played dumb, just going, yeah, good, just acting really important. And there was 40,000 people watching, Willie McCovey, all the award winners, and us 4 standing on the field for the whole thing. Anyway, we had a blast. So greetings from Petros. My daughter Olivia is in tennis season right now, and she is almost 16, so we're driving every night. She likes her dad because her dad lets her drive every time to the grocery store. So I'm taking every bit of all this positive regard toward Dad, and then greetings from my wife Kim, and sometimes you leave your family, and do things like this, and Kim knew that in my heart I was really happy to do this one, to be with you guys. So that makes her happy, and but I'll get back there tomorrow and all will be well. But so greetings from the Papageorges. When I'm not home with my family, I'm at the office, and the office is a counseling office, and I'm a marriage family therapist. And then occasionally I get to do speaking, and in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's turned into kind of remarkable opportunities where I'm being asked to speak in lots of places, including a lot of public schools. And it's remarkable, too, that when you're talking in public schools, and literally 500 to 1,000 parents will show up to these things. Like, what? Are you kidding me? And they say, George, talk on whatever you want to. And it has been fun to, what I'm sharing tonight, I basically get to share to public schools, except I can't use all the exact same words. I only do the sign of the cross, when they're not looking. But all to say, I'm finding that the community around us is in a kind of need that, because of the need, they're very open to have helpers come in. And I definitely want to talk about, the whole role of the community as helpers tonight. So we're talking about cultivating healthy families. And here we are, brought together, as I see it, a couple of things in common for us to come together tonight. One would be that we're talking about cultivating healthy families. So we all have just that whole notion of we're involved with our families somehow. And if there's something we probably share in our hearts, is that of all the things that go on in our families, whether that be with us and our kids, whether that be in our marriages, whether that be in your extended family, with therapy we call family of origin. I don't know if you've been to therapy lately. What we try to do in therapy, in the first session, is we try to take 3 generations of your family history. And it's basically you bringing all the mosaic pieces you can, and we start putting your life story together as much as we can know from Papu's, way back, because we try to just get a sense of what story is going on. So as we have this idea of talking about family tonight, again, whether it's you and your kids or you and your spouse, or whatever the story is with your extended family, or whatever comes to your mind and your heart when we talk about families, tonight we'll be looking at cultivating healthy families, because we all have families. The healthy part is optional, right? So we have that in common, this interest in, gosh, what are we doing, and what are we cultivating, and how do we get something going that has some kind of healthy result? So I think that brings us together. The other thing that brings us together is that we're in church, and we have church in common. I actually want to start with that point. I want to just kind of, in a way, I want to paint a little bit of a picture and kind of use it as a springboard, this idea of church. And I've been reflecting on that, the idea of, okay, we have church in common, but what kind of church in common? What do we do with church? What do we do at church? I was reflecting in the scriptures, and I know you've seen this in the scriptures, because it's kind of a compelling part of the early part of the Gospels. It's when Jesus goes into the wilderness just before he's starting his earthly ministry. So I guess he's about 30 years old. He goes in the wilderness, and I think he spends 40 days and 40 nights there. And what happens in the wilderness? What do we know happens there? What does he encounter? Yeah, he encounters the devil, and he's tempted in all kinds of ways. And if we had time to be super profound, we'd look at all the ways he's tempted. It probably would be all the ways that we get tempted. Probably if we read the scriptures close enough, it's all of what we encounter. And Jesus encounters all that, overcomes that. And it's kind of this powerful, if that scene, if there was a movie on Jesus, that scene would be good to watch on a big screen. It would be compelling. It would be flaming and powerful, and he overcomes all this temptation. And after he overcomes the temptation of the devil, and in a way, I don't know if you guys have Ironman races and all that kind of stuff. You're familiar with that? Lake Tahoe just had one, and I think they run a marathon, right? 26 miles. They swim how far? 2 miles. And what else do they do? Oh yeah, and they bike how far? 100, 50 miles, something like that. Okay, and no wonder they call it Ironman. So what I picture with Jesus coming out of the wilderness is that was absolute Ironman training. He came out of there as lean as can be, ready to go. And in essence, that's what happened. He comes out of there and starts the whole idea of church. And if we look at the scriptures, in Luke 4, it says he goes to the temple, and he apparently serves as, in the temple. And he goes and he reads from the scroll in the temple after this Iron Man training of okay, if I know anything, I know it now. If I ever have clarity, I'm clear on what this mission is about. Right? He comes into the temple basically saying, here it is. This is the mission. This is what we're about. I got reduced down to encountering what I'm really made of, what we're really supposed to be about. And he opens the scroll, and it says, I have come to bring good news to the poor. I have come to heal the brokenhearted. I have come to bring liberty to the captives. I have come to bring sight to the blind. And I have come to bring liberty to the oppressed. Now when we look at that little list, quite powerful, and I want us to reflect for a second just to say that this in boiled down, or we could even say muscled up view of what the church is, it's targeting that kind of mission, the mission of the church. Now, what about that list gets our attention? Well, if we came through the recession and you discovered that you were in the wrong loan on your house and there was no way to get out of it, and if a few more months went by, you'd lose everything, it would be like I brought good news of a loan modification, right? Now, if you weren't in that problem, you just hear it. Good news, oh, loan modification. What else is on the news? Oh, there's that commercial again. But if you were the one stuck in it, that would be like healing words. You qualify for a loan modification. You'd go, oh, good news for me. If you've ever had a loved one that you know them, you love them, but they get caught up in becoming someone totally different. So if you have a loved one that's ever been caught up in addiction, you can talk to them and love them and pull them back to the right side, but you realize that you're talking to that other person. It's not that one you loved. They become someone else. And you experience that powerlessness. Or if you've ever had a family member with mental illness, and it's like, oh, let me just help you. Don't be anxious. We'll work it out. And you realize they sort of go somewhere else mentally. And you're losing them. I don't know if you've ever talked to anyone with an eating disorder. Anorexic could be, 80 pounds. And what do they see in the mirror? They can't stand to see how fat they look to themselves. And you try to talk to them. No. Don't think that way. Just listen to my words. And you realize they don't hear it. Because in those moments you feel like you're losing the one you love. So imagine being able to reach that person with the right kind of treatment. It's that kind of liberty. It's that kind of setting the captive free. Whichever one we might relate to, we go, oh, there's the good news. I relate to that good news. If we just shared stories of our own, if you will, secrets. They say in recovery, we're only as sick as our secrets. And so for people who never share their secrets, they stay in their sickness. It's something if of all the secrets we tend not to share, which ones don't we share? Well, we usually don't share the sexual ones. We could share some of the other ones. We might share a gambling compulsion and go, oh, yeah, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas, and we kind of play it off. We usually don't share the ones where we have shame and it's hidden, and yet we know that if people only knew. So I'll stay silent till my death, not realizing the silence is killing me. And yet if that person found there was something they could do, or something they could experience, or something they could discover, or a community they could be a part of, or a treatment, or something that gives them something to work with, that person would say, that's the good news. That sermon I want to hear. And so here's Jesus saying the mission of the church is this kind of good news, this healing, liberty, and even sight to the blind, this idea that something you don't think is even possible becomes possible. And so as a premise for us tonight, I want us to just share a few ideas with each other on this idea of what brings us together as the church. Now, saying all that, I want to also mention that in the mental health world, there's something interesting called a double bind. And a double bind is something, in studies on where double binds take place, that it leads to a kind of insanity, a kind of crazy making, a kind of sickness, a loss of wellness. An example of a double bind would be as simple as a mother noticing that her daughter feels anxious or troubled. And the mother says, oh, sweetie, no, really, share, we're family. There's no one closer. Share with me what's going on for you. And the daughter is very apprehensive, and obviously it's something very hard to share. And the daughter shares something very vulnerable and very personal. And the mother responds with, I can't believe you would disgrace the family with that. And now I have to be stressed with it. You know better, and I've taught you better. That's a double bind. So this notion of, I have someone inviting me to that close place, and somehow there's penalty. Now, if that same girl shared it with someone that was an acquaintance and had that happen, it would be hurtful, but probably not as hurtful, right? Because the most hurtful part was kind of the mind bender, the double bind of somewhere where I'm invited to be real was where I was punished to be real, right? So I want us to ponder this idea of double bind. I want us to ponder this idea of our sort of Iron Man view of the church, because I believe that we may actually be confronted with a kind of double bind in the church. We read the scriptures, we hear what Jesus says, and again, like the girl, if we're out in the world somewhere and we get judged, or we can't be ourselves, or we have to fake it, and if we're out in the world somewhere and we have to sort of play the game, it's not good for us, it's hurtful, but it doesn't crush us. But if we're in this kind of place, where we're being promised that we get sight to the blind and liberty to the captives, and it doesn't have that kind of healthy process, then that double bind can show up where we sit. So I want us to take a few minutes, I'm going to get your input, because I want us to take a look at two models of the church. From that, then we're going to take a look at those same two models in our parenting, those same two models in our marriages, and those same two models in our personal lives. And the two models I want us to look at, and I want you guys to get your thinking caps on, and actually have you guys discuss this among you a little so that you can give me some input. I would like to ponder first the idea of the church as a museum versus the church as a hospital. I think that's the two models that are common, or kind of two paths the church can take. The church is a museum, and the church is a hospital. So what I want to ask you to do first is get into like groups of whatever, 3 maybe, 4 at the most, and I just want you to come up with characteristics of things that are true about museums and things that are true about hospitals. Now, yeah, we're going to apply it to, now if the church was a museum, now if the church was a hospital, we'll do that in a minute. Start with, though, so you can give me some ideas, what are very common characteristics of church, of a museum and of a hospital. Okay, I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. We're going to jot it down. Then we're going to see what happens when the church is in the one mode versus the other mode. Okay, ready, set, find a friend. Go.
I know.
Let's start turning this way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Alrighty, let's compare notes a little bit. I'll take notes up here. So give me some ideas. What are some characteristics of a museum?
Artifacts.
Okay. What else?
More introspective.
Okay.
There's no touching.
Okay, what else?
Superficial.
Okay.
It's beautiful.
Okay, so
Place to ponder.
Past.
superficial, hold on, after superficial was beautiful. Yep, it's connected to the past.
History, maybe.
Yeah.
Perspective, did you already say that?
Introspective,
Oh.
kind of ish.
Yeah.
Lots of perception, different perceptions.
Okay,
Same art, different perceptions.
Quiet.
so it's kind of perception is reality a little bit.
Static.
Quiet. What's that?
It's very static.
Yeah. Good. What else? Anything else?
Some are free and some are expensive.
Okay. So, and, okay. Anything else? Okay, institutional. Okay.
What's the word I don't know?
Is that Greek?
Superficial, yeah, yeah, exactly. Superficial,
Oh, super.
yes. Alrighty, what are we coming up with on hospital? What's characteristic of a hospital?
It deals with current issues.
Okay.
By sustaining life, freeing hope.
Interactive.
Place of healing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Pain and suffering.
okay. I'll put that with that.
Fear,
Sick people.
Yeah.
hospital gowns.
What's that?
Hospital gowns.
Yeah, hospital, yeah, that's good.
Never seen anything.
Vulnerability.
I heard family, is that what I heard?
Place of knowledge.
Vulnerable.
Knowledge. I heard the word vulnerable. Anything else?
Dynamic.
Okay, so yeah, different from static, dynamic, yeah.
Functional.
Place where you have surgery and cut up people to help them out.
It's a place where you either live or die.
Yeah.
Go for minor or serious.
Okay, so it,
Yeah.
okay,
Healing.
yeah, hold on. Faced with reality. And sort of stepping out of the outside world.
Unknown.
Okay. What else we must go on our list?
Technology.
Okay.
Skills.
Healing, I think we had.
Joy.
Healing. What was it back here again?
Technology.
Technology.
Sterile.
So we'll say modern, something modern about it. Sterile.
You can be joyful for having
Somebody have death there.
Yeah, death, yeah. And we just had joyful also.
Medicine.
Yeah.
Medicine.
Oh,
Medicine.
Oxygen.
First.
Yes.
Doctors.
Out of your control. Things are out of your control.
Okay, good. Anything else have to land on our list?
I have one.
Yeah.
Tom said hospital is a place you don't want to go, and museum is a place you do.
Oh, interesting, yeah. We're going to reflect on that. So I'll just put that as a don't want to go, and yeah. And that is a do want to go. Interesting, so we reflect on that. That'll be a big answer. So what we're seeing so far is definitely museum might not upset your day. Museum might feel like an easy trip to the museum. From what I'm gathering, the trip to the hospital might change your world in a hurry. Maybe it wasn't planned, maybe it was, but you will be confronting, like someone said, something about facing reality. That everything that goes on in a hospital has to do with reality. Whereas in the museum, we could get maybe even a little philosophical, that whatever we get out of it, it's totally up to us on what perception, what we want to take away from it. Certainly we see with hospital, place of healing, but also a place where things like pain and suffering take place. Things where life and death take place. So we're going to keep looking at our list here. I want us to transition a little bit now, and I kind of gave you the clue, right? In terms of, let's imagine now, you know what I was going to do? I had add a couple of my own that kind of comes out of your lists. I would just say here, things are definitely on display. Pretty characteristic to a museum. And I would say treasures locked up. And I would say generally things in a museum are dead. What I'd say about hospital to add, because this is like it's all there, but I would just add right along the lines of what was here is it really embraces reality. It kind of said between the lines, but definitely all about that sickness doesn't disqualify you at a hospital, right? So help me a little bit now if we were saying that Iron Man Jesus, with his mission for this very distinct purpose for the church, being that place of liberty and miracles and sort of recovery. If the church, if we try to take that mission, and I alluded before, the possible double bind, what if we try to take that mission and make our church a museum? Describe for me from our list here, or as you're kind of pondering the kinds of things on our list, would that be, how possible would that be, and basically, what would be the outcome of making the church into a museum? What kind of church would it be? What would thrive, and what wouldn't go over at that church?
Jesus essentially made the scribes and Pharisees a museum.
Okay. So from a scriptural perspective, then Jesus had a few interactions with the church leaders of the time, who apparently had already made the church into the museum. A great chapter, by the way, is chapter 23 of Matthew, and it's called the Woes of the Pharisees. And he lists all these, and I don't know how Jesus said, like if you around my age, when you were in high school, you watched Happy Days, and Fonzie went, whoa. I'm not thinking Jesus said whoa that way, because he basically launches into, if we're using our jargon, you leaders of the church made it into a museum, and he goes on then to say, you slam the door of heaven in people's faces. You worry about all the little things that don't matter, and all the things that do matter you don't pay attention to, right? So, okay, so one view of museum would be that, as you're sharing, Jesus kind of exposed that as a religious problem in his day. What else would come of the church trying to be a museum? What would work, what wouldn't? Yeah?
Well, I mean, I can think of a way the church is like a museum in a good way, and that, I think it's worthwhile to go to a museum and look at the same picture multiple times.
Yes.
And every year you can go back and look at that picture and get something different out of it. It's the
Good.
same way we, read, the same gospels, from year to year, every Sunday, like, the gospel of the prodigal son, like, throughout my life, I can think about how that.
Every time,
is
yes,
on.
yes. So it's something reflective about it. Very good. So that's something that would work.
Those who don't know their own history or do repeat it, so actually knowing the history, having that perspective.
Having-
helps us going forward.
Okay, so connection to the past helps us. Good.
In Orthodox church, especially with, just if you're talking about like this church, the beauty of some of the stuff
Good.
inside gives you respect.
Absolutely. Definitely. What else would come of the church? What else would be going on in that church as a museum? Up to what point would it work? So far we go, wow, when it's you and Jesus and the awesome picture, when it's you and Jesus and that awesome gospel reading, so far it's working, which is fantastic. And by the way, I'd say, is a nice feature of a church that is connected to its past. At what point does it maybe start breaking down and not working? Okay, so what about that? What happens?
Well, it becomes that, don't touch that, don't do that, don't, it's a bunch of rules of, it's too, I guess legalism being, I'm trying to find the right word.
Becomes too rigid.
Yes.
So in a way, and I mentioned the idea of the treasures being locked up, when the church becomes too much of a museum, then absolutely they're doing a good job sort of keeping something preserved, but don't you dare get near it. So then we start having a breakdown on how interactive, how connected can the people be. What else would, in a museum type church, what else, where else would it break down? Yes?
So in the hospital, it's personal and it's intimate. And in a museum, it's not.
Okay, so that difference of distant versus close, set up for display versus when what's exposing itself isn't pretty at all. So we start seeing that when something isn't so ready for display, when the ugliness within us shows up, when it's not so, when the not so lovely comes into play, what does the museum do with that? And if we're using the museum analogy, we say, yeah, they have back rooms for that. So we start seeing that, oh, maybe the select can make the cut in a museum. Father, you're going to say something.
I was gonna say that the pictures on the wall are more valuable than the people watching them.
Okay.
Like if I went to touch the Mona Lisa, they'd probably shoot me. because
Okay.
they're not-
Okay. Yeah. So there might be some perspective problems with, what is regarded. It's great to have that picture as being valuable because it is, but there might be some loss of perspective of how else do we view value, and maybe the value of a human person might be lost. Yes.
The museum usually has leisure associated with it, because you can take a look at this, take a look at that, no hurry, everything's fine. Leisure isn't necessarily there in a hospital, it's like, whoa,
Very
we
good.
gotta do something now.
Yeah, which one is leisurely here? Definitely, museum is great if you're in a great space. It works when your life can afford you a stroll. And when your life is in a strolling mode, the church would probably work pretty well as a museum.
We also talked about how the museum is an optional place to go. It's an option. We could do it, we could part of it, we can't do all of it. And whereas that hospital, there's no option when
Very
you
good.
really need help.
Very interesting point. So then we start even seeing what pulls us to that place. Oh, it's kind of optional. Oh, I feel like going. Oh, I kind of want to get stimulated. Oh, I kind of want to be entertained a little, versus something compelling. I've got to be there. There's something that I need that for me today.
There's a sense of judgment sometimes in museums, if you hear people walking around and they think, ew, that's not art, that's hideous, or I wouldn't ever put that.
Okay, so where might snooty attitudes thrive? More in a museum or hospital?
Museum.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, have you worked in a hospital? Is that your snooty friend? Is that what you're trying to tell me? So definitely, the idea of attitude really shows up differently in these two places. Okay? Now, thinking about church as a hospital, maybe that seems obvious, but let me hear a little bit of why it is as a hospital what would the church be like if it functions as a hospital? What would be true about it? What would it do? What would it be interested in?
Healing.
Okay, so a place of healing.
And to be everybody's healing.
Okay, so it's not exclusive. It's not, okay, you got the membership or you rank pretty high, so you get all the bonuses here. It's anyone qualifies. And in fact, the sicker you are, will get you in even quicker. Okay, what else? Church as a hospital. If you're trying to describe the church as a hospital.
Welcoming and compassion.
Okay, so definitely the incoming, right? They receive you with compassion. Imagine a hospital that the incoming was like, oh, hold on a second, we're going to get to you, we're really busy, but, and it couldn't be a hospital, right? So even how, when someone is even coming for the first time, it might be the most vital time to embrace them. What else would you say about the church as a hospital?
It's full of life. It's
Okay.
full of different kinds of.
So lots of dynamics going on, right? And
It's alive, yeah.
yeah, very alive. And even though it's dealing with life and death, it's a whole lot more alive than this really civilized place over here. And yet, very, very alive. Anything else we want to say about church as a hospital? Yeah.
I think in my experience at hospitals is that most of the people working there have a really strong intention to help.
So we have people who work at a hospital aren't there randomly. There's a kind of mission. Remember Jesus, the Iron Man, coming out of the wilderness? There was a strong mission of, I know what I'm about. This is what we have to be about. This is what we're dealing with, he's thinking. And then that hospital be like, we know what we're here for. This is my shift. I'm ready to help in every way possible. Very good. Yeah?
You remind me of something that Federica Matthews Green has talked about. She lives in Virginia or something. Baltimore.
Yeah.
Close to Baltimore. And she says that the Johns Hopkins, the University Medical Center, is touted as one of the best hospitals. And she says that sometimes we Orthodox, we make the claim that, we have the best hospital. But she says it can only be the best hospital if you allow the nurses and the doctors to heal you. It does absolutely nothing for you if you are in the neighborhood of a great hospital, but you eat crackers and water. And I think that is what she says that sometimes happens.
Yes. So the idea of how does a hospital function? Yeah.
I think one thing
Yeah.
in the hospital is there is no small talk.
That's right.
You get right to the,
Yeah.
you don't waste time on
That's right.
making things.
So yeah, no small talk. It's not like, we're probably here, we'll probably figure out why we're here. It's like, oh no, we're here for a reason, right? So I want to say, as we think about church at the hospital, is it embraces reality, and any kind of diagnosis and any kind of treatment is going to be possible. Any help for the patient is possible because it's based on what's really going on. Imagine being in a place where your help depends on how forthcoming you are on what's really going on. Could you imagine going to a hospital, sick as can be, way on the inside, but somehow feeling a little self-conscious? The doctor goes, okay, so what is it? Well, I was just wanting exercise, so I walked to the hospital. I wanted to see what you guys do, and I have appreciation for health. It'd be like, he'd entertain you for a second, and then be like, okay, I'm really glad you're here, but, it wouldn't make any sense. And so this idea of what's really going on, it's the place where, if there's ever a place on the planet where we get at what's really going on, it's the church as a hospital. Okay? The other thing I would say, kind of extracting out of all that, is no judgment for weakness or sickness. Now again, can you imagine, you do keep that appointment, they do get you to that, in that hospital room, and then you do share what's going on. I mean, we couldn't even, it would be a joke to imagine that then at that point, they start coming up with, well, you really have not taken care of yourself very much. Don't you watch the Kaiser Permanente commercials? Like, you're supposed to thrive. Now, what is wrong here? Like, it would be, you'd run for it would be, you would believe that you're better off trying to heal yourself. And we have so many churchgoers who are concluding that. I'm better off trying to heal myself. If we run into the problem of, is that church experience one that embraces reality, where what's really going on is welcome? Is that place a place of no judgment for whatever weaknesses start showing through? And then here, similar, but receive afflicted with compassion. Keep in mind, we established the museum display. External matters most. We said treasures are locked up, and I'm just pulling out these few, kind of embedded in all that you guys said. And just the plain truth of not living. Now, as we pondered it, and certainly, I mean, you guys, I mean, I'm kind of probably preaching the choir here. For you guys to be here means you're, some kind of, part of active life here. But I want us to reflect on all that this could mean for us now, just starting out with church life. Am I going to be in a mode that I'm myself representing the church as a museum or church as a hospital? And it doesn't mean if we're in this building or not. It means in every conversation, I'm going to be more museum mode, which encourages you to be on display, and what I see matters most. In my conversation in this building or out of the building, will I be all into like, oh yeah, let's all be close and open, but when it comes time for me to share who I really am, oh no, that the treasures are locked up. Or will I just go through motions and not really let anything live through me? Okay, so we ponder that about our church life or our part in the church. Now, what I'd like to do is then take the next step of our little journey tonight and say, what if we had this same reflection, but now we're going to talk a little more personally and say, our parenting life. What if we said, it's a little weird way to say it, I've never said it this way before, but what if we pondered parenting as a museum or parenting as a hospital? Okay, same way we just reflected. Now, what I want you to do, and I'll give you less than 3 minutes. This time I'm going to, or should I just ask you? How do you want to do it? Just ask? Okay. Okay, ponder here for a second. Tell me what comes of it. What happens if someone handles parenting as a museum? Of all the things we said about museums and or these things. And then parenting as a hospital, what happens with that mode of all the things we said, including these things? So let's start with museum. Think about parenting in a mode that's a museum mode. What comes of that kind of parenting? What kind of parenting is it? Yeah?
Everything is kind of the same. You get the same old, like, I don't know, nothing really changes, I guess, from what they're telling you.
Okay.
What they're telling you doesn't really change.
Okay, so the way I hear that is kind of like parenting out of a box. Like, it doesn't matter what kid you are, I do my parenting out of a box. And so I'm going to give you the same answers. And I don't even really have to get to know you. I'm going to say things like, okay, cheer up, so long, or whatever it is, and think that if it'll work for this child, it should work for every child. Very generic, very kind of like not so personal. Okay? What else? Parenting as a museum do we think about? Yeah?
Very black and white.
Okay.
You either met the standard or you fell short.
Very good, yeah.
And your shortcomings are very, held to this pillar of
Yes.
perfection.
Yes, so definitely this sort of display-oriented parenting would have a very black and whiteness to it, a rigidity to it, you're good enough or you're not good enough. Definitely children in this kind of situation would come away, and maybe it's not even explainable to them, but they'd come away going, I don't know why, I just feel like I'm not good enough for my family or my mother or my father or whatever, okay? What else? Yeah?
Possibly, superficial politeness. They speak a certain way, we talk a certain way, but then there's really nothing else beyond that that's ever discussed. You put on a good show, people think your family is a great family, but there's really nothing discussed, and you're afraid to talk about it.
Well said, well said. So, like, family on display. Imagine that it matters more to this family how you are on display as opposed to how you really are, right? And what that would mean, and what do you do emotionally with that, right? And by the way, too, they have studies, and I know it doesn't apply to the Psychologies because they are heart and soul, but they've done studies on like pastors and priests' kids. And like, yeah, I know, but then the worldly equivalent would be like CEO's kids, right? It is like high risk because of the on display trap, right? Right? What's that?
A lot of shallowness.
Okay, so to be shallow, it's really going to start marginalizing toward, okay, what really matters? And it's like, well, I guess what's really going on doesn't matter, so I better not go too deep, right? So I'll keep it at a certain level, be shallow or superficial. Yes?
You get some Orwellian and double talk in there.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe some, Department of Peace is really the war fighting kind of.
Okay, so you could, with that is where you have some possible double binds in a family. This is what we're about, this is what we stand for, and yet it doesn't live out the day-to-day from the heart that way. Anything else with that? Yeah?
You never talk about your stuff with anybody else. It's
Right,
like
Trey-
stuck in the back room.
Yeah, that's right, treasures are locked up.
Yeah.
You don't really come out with what's going really deep in your life. Yeah.
In my business, dealing with building codes, there's two aspects, performance and prescriptive. Prescriptive says, this is what you shall do. But the performance aspect says, this is the objective. Tell us how you can achieve that and meet the standard you set. So there's flexibility in one, and creativity, but in the other, you're just locked in.
Locked in. And so now imagine, we're talking about parenting, right? So we're talking about this, because tonight we're talking about cultivating healthy families. We're talking about the cultivating of this, the whole worldview of a child, of, as Father Tom reminded us of the value question of who am I, what am I worth? Well, in the museum family, you're like, well, I guess I'm worth this when I do this, and I'm worth nothing when I do that, and all kinds of internal confusion going on. Yes?
One thing I've heard from people is if they've kind of grown up with severe conflicts in their family and they just kind of accept it as a norm, then if they ever do open up or talk about it, then it's kind of shocking for everyone else to hear because they've simply accepted it as a fact. That's just how their life is, but then everyone else realizes, oh my gosh, that's so wrong. They don't even realize anything's different or messed up in their life.
Okay, right, yeah. So a lot of confusion. What else can we say about museum? Anything else about that family that's putting that emphasis externally?
Well, you're not living up there, and if you don't know, really, you don't discuss anything past a very formal level. You never know why the rules are what they are, you never, so
Yeah.
if you have kids of your own, you do things on this subconscious level of
Yeah.
performance because that's, and you don't even know why, it's just, that's the way my family did it, that's the way I do it, well, why?
Yep.
Don't ask.
Right, so even on the whole issue around, I give a talk in the schools called Raising Our Sons, and it's a talk on boys. And one of the things I talk about is that testing limits. And all the moms are there wanting to hear about testing limits because, it's so stressful because boys are so notorious on testing every limit. But I inform them, I have a little this little top 10 things to know about boys, and it has these blanks that they're supposed to figure out what goes in the blanks. And how does it go? Blank, boys test limits to feel blank and blank. And they're trying to figure that out. And it's actually, when you look at the studies, boys test limits to feel alive and masculine. Now, let's go into a museum family. You don't dare test the limit because the rules are very clear and there's no discussion. And they would look at something like testing a limit that a boy, it's like, oops, they're going to do that, right? And we have to, know how to receive that kind of behavior and deal with that kind of behavior. But if they never get to, that boy can grow up to be a man in some ways, but never get to really discover the masculinity of what it's like to go, I'm going to try, and find out that they'll still be loved. There may be a consequence, but they'll still be loved because they got to just try to be themselves. So we see that something starts dying in that person. Okay? So I want to talk about this for a second, just to say a couple things. a really good book by a woman named Madeline Levine, if you're into parenting books. I'm going to share 2 titles of parenting books on our 2 sides of parenting, either in the museum or in the hospital. This one goes in the museum category, and it's by Madeline Levine. It's called The Price of Privilege. And this woman's actually from Marin County, which is just north of the Golden Gate, down in our area. And she wrote a book about 5 or 6 years ago, and I couldn't believe the reading I was doing, because it was like she looked in all my files of all the adolescents I ever worked with. It was that, like, identical. Basically what she's saying, because she works with a population similar to the population I work with, and what she calls, the price of privilege. Her basic findings were that, to her, it was shocking. And it was interesting because it was shocking to me, because my early days of work in youth ministry as well as in therapy was I'm from San Francisco originally, and I used to work in the Mission District, which would be kind of like the barrio, the ethnic, the hood, the mix of like all of Central America right there. Awesome, colorful, amazing place. A lot of stuff goes on. But I was accustomed to that kind of youth work. And then, kind of moved to the burbs as I got a little older, and that's when I encountered what she wrote about in her book, which she calls The Price of Privilege. And what she says in The Price of Privilege basically would be this phenomenon where she's saying she's seeing young people who, 2 things would be true about them. Number 1 is they would be in a family with some kind of material advantage. They sort of had it better than their parents. Also, they would be in a family not only having material advantage, but they would have a distinct description where they describe parental performance pressure. Material advantage plus parental performance pressure equals what she wrote about, a very drastic, underdeveloped emotional life of kids. And so what she found, for instance, was of those kids that she worked with, that by junior high, the girls had a 25% higher rate of depression and anxiety than the national average. So you even take national average, where there's lots of depression and anxiety, and here's these privileged girls from very focused families, 25% higher anxiety. They found that high school boys would describe their partying as not being for social reasons, but for self-medicating. And that this underdevelopment in their emotional lives, so if you can picture that, they're getting a bunch of great stuff. Why do you suppose they'd have underdeveloped emotional lives? What comes to mind?
Because people are always telling them how to feel or how to think.
Okay, so we have
They're so busy, they're so overwhelmed.
right. So we have, remember, kids are just trying to make sense of reality at all. But here in that formula, I think there would inadvertently be so much of, and I don't think it's on purpose, but this message to the child that who they are really is about things outside of them. That money and what you have increases your value. You have way more to offer. You're way more likable when you look like that and all that. And that you are only as good as your performance. Right? Only as good as your performance. Well, we have a lot of high-performing kids who don't know they have a problem because they're still high-performing. It's a lot like what we find in middle-aged men. Ta-da! And that is, you feel okay about life until you get midlife, and then everything that was working so well isn't working so well. And we have high rates of depression in middle-aged men because they're not getting the promotions, their body's not cooperating the same way, and all of that isn't performing up here, and the bottom drops out, and they don't know what to do. They're in complete clinical depression because who they thought they were and where they found their value starts evaporating. Yeah.
But do you think that the schools have anything to do with it? I mean, like around here at least, the kids that go to the really affluent, like $20,000 to $30,000 a year for elementary school.
Right.
Then all the other kids are the same, and then the parents are also doing 3 hours of private tutoring
Oh,
every
yeah.
day. So, no, because I mean, I
No,
know
right.
people like that, right? So is that part of the
Well,
problem?
so we'd say, what's part of the problem? There's all kinds of parts of the problem. But let's have a museum family and make sure we pay a lot of money to send them to a museum school so that we can prepare them for a museum college, so they can marry someone in the museum, and we can multiply. I mean, so yes, right? Yes to your question. It's all of the above. And am I putting down any of those great, excellent things? No, I'm in the middle of all of the coaching and this and the that and the what was the score and whatever, right? But we have to be very careful, and that's why I want to bring our attention to which mode are we in. And when a child gets the prominent message, because they're certainly going to get it from the world, particularly the world we tend to scoot them into. But if they particularly get that message at home, and and kids read parents. They know, and pardon my French a little bit, but they know if you think they suck at a sport. They know it. So even though the words are saying, oh, it's really all about the fun, right? They're reading you that you're so bored and that you wish you were like the down the street neighbor who had a kid who could perform. And they read that in us, right? So it's that kind of thing, right? So this is the kind of thing going on in parenting as a museum. Now, parenting as a hospital, I want to just direct our attention. Now, again, parenting as a hospital. Now, tell me how parenting, if you want to reflect on any one of these in the parenting world, which one would you pick to comment on that you think somehow is going to impact our parenting job? Okay, so something about that our kids get some sense in our family that whatever's really going on is what we're most interested in. Okay, what else do you think? Yeah.
Well, as a child, I know that the way my mom raised me emphasizes a lot on the compassion part. When we screw up, it's kind of like, okay, you screwed up. But
I learned more of that than you did.
Yeah, right. Yeah, all right. That's awesome. So check this out. That's a beautiful testimonial right there. And I would say, for a child, that could be the difference of sanity and insanity. Because parents say things like, I love you and all that kind of stuff. But when the screw up happens, if there's a kind of judgment that says, you're really not lovable, that's a kind of insanity. That would be similar if we picked if as Orthodox Christians we said, let's really mess up our theology. Oh, I know how we can mess it up. We could say God loves you. Okay, yeah, that's good. We'll start with that. And then, so then we can say, but when you sin, he's super pissed. And maybe, if you might have to do some amazing things to win him back. But we're not going to let you know for sure because you might need to just fear the brink of hell your whole life. Then maybe you might get it right. Let's do our theology that way.
So if you add but, that's the key word.
Yeah. So if we had that kind of theology, that's the kind of family life we'd be saying if we were saying, I love you, but... and then it all evaporates. See, it's the same kind of sickness. And, interestingly enough, people who have been raised with sick theologies have difficulty with sickness in their personal life. And I would say people who have sickness in their personal life are vulnerable to be attracted to sick theologies. Because if they were verbally abused as a child, you can go to church on a Sunday and get verbally abused. And it happens in mega churches all over. Or wherever. In whatever system we're talking about, right? So this is what we want to be looking at in terms of cultivating healthy families. We really want to get that sense of what's healthy and what's not. What cultivates it, what doesn't. What allows life to come out and then cultivate it? And what makes it get buried? See? So here on the museum side, I talked about the Price of Privilege book. Over here, there's a guy, I quoted him last time, I was going to call him Father John, no, I don't think he's a father, he's a Jewish guy. John Gottman, Dr. John Gottman, and people who've read about marriage stuff. He's known as the only guy that's done scientific studies on marriages, right? Super interesting guy. And when I first heard about him, I thought, scientific study, okay, there's studies on marriage, but what makes it scientific? Well, and I thought, did he have laboratory rats that married each other? I mean, how did he do it? So one of the things he did was, he studied the same couples for 25 years. Up here, University of Washington, right? Well, so super insightful, great research. Well, he writes a parenting book. And I don't have the title exactly right, something like Raising Your Kids with Emotional Intelligence. Or Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, right? So he has, I've got a quote of his. So there's a million parenting books, they all have something good in it, whatever. This one really grabbed me because it gave me a sense of it's just fundamentally in the right column. And he says, early in his book, he says, after a bunch of research that he does, because he's the research guy, he goes, our results, what's that here? I see it to read it. Our results tell a simple yet compelling story. We have found that most parents fall into one of two broad categories. Those who give their children guidance about the world of emotion, and those who don't. Two basic categories of parents. And I think one a museum and one hospital. Okay? So as we ponder that, I want to just reflect on parents in the hospital mode would definitely, and I've got handouts for anybody after you come up, one of the things he does is he talks about parenting styles. And he has a bunch of styles that kind of sound pretty practical and pretty efficient, but for instance, they end up cultivating into a style called the dismissing parent. For instance, treats the child's feelings as trivial. Focuses on how to get over emotions rather than the meaning of the emotion. Sees the child's emotions as a demand on them, therefore something to fix. Believes that a child's negative emotions reflect badly on the parents. That would be the dismissing parent. The disapproving parent would judge or criticize the child for the emotional expression. The disapproving parent would be over-aware of the need to set limits on their child. The disapproving parent reprimands or disciplines or punishes the child for emotional expression. And then he gets into a couple other styles. And then just to illustrate for our hospital mode, what he calls the emotional coach. Uses emotional moments, so the child has emotions coming out. Who has children here, they spaz out on a regular basis. Uses emotional moments to listen to the child, help the child label the emotion, offer guidance on regulating how high or low those emotions go, sets limits and teaches acceptable and effective expression of emotion, teach problem solving. The emotional coach does not poke fun at a child's emotions. The emotional coach does not say how the child should feel. The emotional coach can tolerate this very interesting emotional moment, okay? The emotional coach can tolerate spending time with a sad, angry, or fearful child. Does not become impatient with those negative emotions. So I've got these, you come up after and get one if you want a copy. But see that sense of what, when that emotion and issue shared about your family life, it's like the real stuff comes up and you find there's room for me in the inn. There's room for me here. And my emotions. I can really live here. I'm welcome here. Because when that stuff came up, there was room for it. Okay? So that's parenting either in the museum mode or the hospital mode. So moving right along, for us married folks or folks who have any thought of having a relationship, let's talk about relationships and marriage in a museum versus a hospital. So let's start with museum. What kinds of things come to mind that would be a relationship, a marriage? What kind of marriage would we end up having in the museum mode?
Lonely.
Okay, lonely. Why would it end up being lonely?
Well, because you look good on the outside, maybe the two people look to the world like they have a great relationship or something, but if you have no communication, you have no depth to that
Okay.
past the.
Okay, so let's review our list, right? So on display, the couple that's on display where external matters most. The couple where treasures are locked up. So what are the treasures that are locked up in the life of a couple?
No communication.
Okay. So imagine, if what's really going on in them just isn't welcome somehow, imagine what happens with that communication. It can only go so far, right? And then, of course, little by little, the life of the couple, just in terms of the life of the couple diminishes. Okay? Anything else come to mind of the couple in that mode? Yeah.
If both people are contributing 100%, if it's more about one person or more about the other, and you're
Very
giving
good.
it your all, but the other person isn't really trying.
Okay, very good. So definitely, if it goes in museum mode, we have one treasure and one onlooker. It's called the narcissistic relationship. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Or
Yes.
Or one spouse wants to be at the museum and the other spouse doesn't want, the other one doesn't want to be at the museum.
Okay, yeah. Definitely. And definitely, depending on the life cycle of the couple, early in the relationship, it might be, oh, yes. They say, the first 10 years of marriage, you know how it is, opposites attract. Unless you've been married 10 years or more, and then it switches to opposites attack. Right? Because in the early gazing stage of relationship, I'm happy to go to the museum and hear about all of what you're about, right? But then after a while, it's like, okay, been there, done that, let's move on, So, what else comes to mind in the museum mode?
It superficially functions until things get real and then
Okay.
falls apart.
Okay, good. So it can function when it's in the okay mode. When things are going okay, then it's okay. As soon as some real stuff shows up, then they don't know what to do with not okay. Right? And then it can fall apart. Absolutely. Yes. It's a very, we're using very simple words on a very profound premise of the life of the couple that doesn't know how to deal with the not okay. And so it can function on the superficial. And, I think also sometimes, even Jesus says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man, whatever. I think in some ways, if you think of the life of a couple, if we can keep somehow funding that the external keeps it all going, it can keep it all going, but only to discover that it has enabled us to live in a way that has no life in it. Let's just get really good at the external and never really learn how to do the internal.
It's like putting a skin graft over gangrene.
Okay, yeah, and it's gonna look pretty. Yes, what's going on the inside. So what's going on the inside of the couple? What's going on the inside of the individual? And the museum mode is, what's going on the inside somehow isn't welcome. Somehow isn't finding the courage. Somehow maybe not safe to enter into an exchange with the person they're married to. Okay? A couple thoughts I want to share on that is, something that's really sort of epidemic for us as sort of high-functioning Americans in this fast lane kind of life we lead, is something that even happens in our family of origin, kind of inadvertently, is very commonly we figure out what our role is in life. Now, in your family, you may have taken on different roles just to kind of keep everybody happy. Sometimes we have the class clown, sometimes we have the all-star, and sometimes we mix that up as being us. But really, it's our role. And then we become a student and we get educated, or we become a worker, we get trained, we get our profession, we get married, we take on the role of spouse. We might take on the role of parent. And what's epidemic among us by accident is the fact that all our role, who we are in our role, gets all the airtime, gets all the development, gets all the feeding to keep the role going. But then it's role versus self, the person behind the curtain. The person like way in on the inside. A lot of marriages function well when they're in the role mode. What's the really high, anybody know 2 high rates of divorce? When in the life cycle of a family there's 2 high rates of divorce?
During illness.
Okay, so when stress hits.
When children move out.
Okay, when children move out. So what's interesting is there's these 2 spikes in the divorce rate. One is when married couples have toddlers, and when married couples have everything from teenage to empty nest. So from the empty nest, so I want to bring up 2 points on this. From the empty nest perspective, it would be we've gotten so good in our roles. When our role is done, we're done. Did you get that one? When our role is done, we're done. Everything we were about was our role. How common is that? Common. Super common.
So why the toddler one?
The toddler one, what's interesting is it's the first time, not necessarily first time, but it's a chronic time where there's someone in the household testing limits like crazy, and it brings out all the differences in the couple more than ever before. Because very often you have 2 very distinct parenting styles that show up sort of for the first time. And when you have the differences, so it illustrates that what do couples do with their differentness? In the museum, differentness isn't okay. We have to like cover up the cracks. We have to like not show that stuff. In the life of a couple, if they don't know how to deal with how to be different with one another, they will have high conflict until one is hoping the other finally breaks. So there's no conflict. In that model, differentness, you have a winner and a loser. You see? And in the divorce rate, there's, that leads to lots of broken relationships. Okay? Now, in the hospital mode, now let's do this first, right? The marriage that does these things. Embraces reality, no judgment for weakness or sickness, and you are received with compassion. Now, ponder that for a second about your own marriage. And there might even be some key words up there that the thought of it would seem refreshing to you. Wow, the thought that I wouldn't be judged. I can say anything to my spouse, I wouldn't be judged. Yeah?
I kind of like your perspective or how you would approach the no judgment for weakness or sickness. I mean, I think in principle that makes sense to me, and I think a lot of people, welcoming people with compassion, welcoming them and making them feel open to talk about things, but then how do you do that while maintaining boundaries?
Right.
Your beliefs, and not encouraging
Right.
weakness or
So
sickness.
so the question is, how can you be so open to receive sort of the affliction of the other and the weakness of the other, and you not become the enabler that's just enabling them to stay sick?
That makes sense. It goes with approval.
Right. And the answer I'd say on that definitely will depend on how much of self you have intact. And what I mean by that is if their sickness and their differentness isn't determining who you are and how you are, isn't determining your mood every day, isn't it determining your well-being, then you can accept them just like you can accept the anorexic child and know, I love you so much, I'm going to insist on treatment. I'm going to sit by you in every meal until we get out of this. And there's a lot of boundary setting that's called for, that acceptance can involve a tough love, but who can have boundaries and accept at the same time? The person who could do that is the person who has some amount of centeredness within themselves. Because the person who enables the sick person to keep staying sick is actually the fearful person. I'm afraid you'll reject me if I stand up to you. I'm afraid that I'll lose some kind of security. Or I'm going to enable you because somehow if I fix you on your terms, this will all work. They get into some crazy thinking. So this no judgment and receiving with compassion is not the same as no boundaries and anything goes. We know that in the church. What makes Orthodox Church Orthodox is it's Orthodox. What's Orthodox mean? The right way. It says, here's the boundary. It's a great quote from the Fathers. It says, we know where the kingdom of God is. We won't tell you where it isn't. We can tell you where it is. We won't tell you where it isn't because we're not going to judge. But we know who we are. The Orthodox Church that's secure is saying, we're not going to judge the evangelicals over there. But we know who we are, so we're going to be faithful to show up to liturgy and vespers because we know who we are. So we don't have to judge, but we get a boundary of saying, but this defines me. A whole other workshop, some future visit maybe, is one on boundaries. There's great stuff on boundaries. But this whole boundary thing depends on, do I have enough security in me to set a boundary with you? If I have security within myself, I'm able to love you like crazy and then set a boundary when I need to as well. That's all dependent on how secure I am in myself. So this judgment and love having judgment and no judgment and love, it is not a boundaryless equation. Okay. Now, the reason we have a boundary and no judgment is because we're embracing reality. Sweetie, I can't take your drinking anymore. I love you. I'm falling apart. I can't take it. I'm telling you reality. I'm not judging you. That's different than, you've ruined my life, and da-da-da-da, and when you come home, I'm disgusted by you. That spouse may think they're saying the same message. That's a very different message than, sweetie, I can't take it. I'm falling apart. I've got to let you know, if we don't figure out treatment and you're not taking some decision for treatment, I can't live here until you do. That's not judgmental. That's reality. And it's boundaries, and I'm not judging you, I'm loving you enough to tell you the truth about at least my experience with you. Okay?
And it's extremely compassionate compared to loving the person.
That's why we're comparing to a hospital, because the hospital doesn't enable us. Oh, you're fine. Oh, no big deal. Oh, you don't want to stay in the hospital? No biggie. No, they have boundaries. You're sick, you're staying. Sorry. They have boundaries. But with compassion, right? Because they're tuning into the reality that you're presenting. See? So we think about this, the one thing I'd say in this marriage as a hospital, it must bring up the subject of intimacy. And I mean intimacy first in the broadest sense, in the most sort of embracing sense, which is, kind of an emotional intimacy that leads to physical intimacy and all kinds of spiritual intimacy, all that closeness. But I would say, one way I would talk about intimacy, I reflect on just because I've dealt with so many couples that end up not having intimacy and closeness and connection. And that would be, my little definition of intimacy would be, when we're at our most different, we can be at our closest. That's true intimacy. When we're at our most different, we can be the closest. Now, I'm going to give a quickie, because we got to move along here. But if you think about the beauty of love in the marriage relationship, which includes this amazing physical, sexual relationship, the key to it, I only took one class of biology, but I think this is right. It's the differentness in the two people that really make it work. Right? Do I have my biology right? Physiology right? So the differentness allows closeness, an amazing closeness. It doesn't prevent closeness. Differentness makes the closeness super special. What we do as married people is we accept that premise, but any other kind of differentness, what's your problem? You're not supposed to be different in this marriage. If you love me, be just like me. And we hammer emotionally and relationally for years based on some notion that closeness can only happen when we're the same. Well, if we are not allowing the differentness of the person we love, we can't have intimacy, physically or emotionally. Does our marriage allow the differentness in our spouse? And is their differentness just as welcomed as our differentness? Here's our problem, because we tend toward narcissism. We don't think our stuff is different. Just theirs is different. Right? Right? I hate when it happens. I know, right? Right? But what do we do with differentness? Whatever we do with differentness, it defines us. It defines us in our relationship. Let me put it this way, and then I'll move right along. Whatever we do with differentness will define us as parents. Because it's when our child makes the mistake that really defines how loving we are. It's when our child disappoints us that really defines how much love they're ever going to get from us. How we deal with differentness in our marriage defines absolutely how close we're ever going to be with that person we're married to. If we can't tolerate their differentness, or at least be in honest dialogue about what's going on with that differentness, again, I'm not saying enable it, I'm saying be open and discuss what does this differentness mean to us, whatever that is, point of view or whatever. And then if, however we deal with differentness, will define us as Christians. Jesus said, it's no big deal when you love your friends. It's when you love the different ones. What do you call them? Oh, our enemies. Right? That's what's going to define us. So, and then just to close this portion, just to say, the scriptures are very powerful about this, and they even, call a whole little theological term called the incarnation. But there's a scripture that says, when we were at our most different, Christ died for us. It actually reads, when we were sinners, Christ died for us. And that when we were most not of who we really are, that's when the love showed up. So does that show up? One final thing I'll say about marriage. If there's one skill, one tool in our toolbox that can absolutely keep us alive and well in the hospital mode and out of the museum mode, it would be the skill called real listening. We mix up these A words. The A word we mix up is acknowledge and agree. We think that real communication and being able to listen, I will listen up until I stop agreeing with you. And then once I stop agreeing, it's my turn for sure. And when a person feels listened to, and they know that you're listening to something that they know you don't agree with, but you're acknowledging it anyway, and you're taking it in, you're valuing it, whoa. Talk about intimacy. Oh, we got close even when we were different. It's in simple terms called active listening, reflective listening. But the key of it is listen to understand. Don't worry about agreeing. So if that was one tool in the toolbox, it would be, and it's the style of Jesus, if we wanted a role model for that. Like he came alongside people. He hung out with people where they really lived. But that whole notion of listening literally would be, and this sounds really kind of silly and lame, but in its seed form is it. And that is what we call the little empathetic formula, which is, it sounds tacky to say it this way, but I want you to have it, is it sounds like you feel X because of Y. It sounds like you feel sad because I've been staying late at work every night. It sounds like you feel sad because I've been staying late at work. Okay, that's a listening response. That's an empathetic response, right? Because I heard what you were feeling that's different than what I thought you should feel, because I could have responded this way. The person just shared, I'm feeling very sad and angry that you've been late every night. Oh, you're mad? Oh, you're mad. Thank you. Great. So I'm busting my hump all week, and you're sad and mad. Nice. Nice. What do you think about doing? I'm buying you the new tile in the bathroom. I'm buying you new granite for the kitchen. See, we could respond that way. How do you think that would go over? See, so that would be, we heard the different thing we didn't like, bam, and we had to say how not okay it was. Because it didn't make sense to us. Listening isn't about making sense to us, it's about us making sense of their experience. Wow, it sounds like you feel X because of Y. It sounds like you feel this way because of that. Now, when ego takes over, it does all the pounding and craziness. When it's, wow, I get what's going on for you, right? So that is marriage in the hospital mode. Okay, moving right along into our final area is, and a lot of this we've kind of been inductively collecting as we go, which is, we've talked about parenting in the museum or hospital, marriage in the museum or hospital. Now, I just want us to reflect a little bit about our personal life in the museum or the hospital. Imagine your approach of how you're living your life, your approach of how you encounter yourself, your approach to how you deal with yourself in museum mode, in hospital mode. What would be true about the person who's dealing with themselves in the museum mode? What would be true about them, or what would happen in their life, or what would occur? Yeah?
They are very superficial and their true self never shows.
Okay, so who they really are is very locked up, right? Treasure's locked up for sure. Definitely they're going to be more about displaying something that's skin deep, okay? Yes, very true, thank you.
Don't want anybody messing with the display.
Okay, yeah, don't mess with the display. Yeah, don't get too close, don't mess with me. And I've positioned my who I think I want people to think I am in a certain way, so don't mess with it. Absolutely true for that person's personal life. And think about how relationships would go from there, right? But, okay, what else would be true about their personal life? Anything else in the museum mode?
I think they value being busy.
Okay, so
Super scheduled.
okay, so very good. So definitely, because they're not living from the inside out, they better have a lot going on the outside.
Could you repeat what she said?
Oh, she said they're going to be super scheduled and busy. And which is a beautiful point, because it illustrates perfectly that when it's not living on the inside, you better keep the plate spinning on the outside. I had a woman tell me in therapy years ago, she was awesome because she was just so honest about it. And I think they were from Michigan, and then they went to Colorado, and they were in California the first time. She just, this is the longest, she had like a love-hate relationship with therapy. Like, I don't know why I'm here, but then she'd come out with all these 100 reasons why she's there, it's awesome. And, but she said up until, and they'd been in a California house for 5 years at that point, it was long, it's always been 2 years. She says every time something personally started coming through, she makes sure, because her husband, was making all the money, they build a new house or move. And building a new house or moving, or both, was good to keep her afloat for a couple of years. And then she'd settle down, start feeling her feelings, and then pack up again, that kind of thing, right? So it was the first time they'd stayed, and so now it's like, I'm in therapy because all the inside stuff started showing up, right? So definitely the personal life has an inner life that's blocked, right? Denial would be high. I don't really feel that. That really doesn't bother me. See, that kind of thing. Not honest about what's going on inside. Keep in mind that people in the museum, in their personal lives, if they're not dealing with their inner life, and Father Tom had shared the quote from St. Isaac from last time, to see yourself as you really are is a miracle greater than raising the dead. Love that one. Keep in mind though, if you're the individual in the museum, and you're not tending to the inner life, the fathers teach us something. Well, the fathers teach us something, Jesus teaches us something, and Freud teaches us something, and it's all the same things. And that is, when you don't deal with the inner life, you don't look, you don't have glasses that can see what's going on in the inner life, this interesting phenomenon, you're going to have 20/20 vision you're going to have the ability, and not only ability, you'll be plagued to notice the faults of other people. It's a strange insanity we bring upon ourselves. The person who blocks their inner life will, and the scriptures talk about, don't look at the speck in your brother's eye when you've got this 2x4 coming out of your own eye. It's that phenomenon. Jesus called it a whole, Freud, I get this, I don't get this. I've been doing therapy for too long. But Freud talks about this blocked inner life, and he talks about denial, and the whole denial-based system he calls defense mechanisms. Basically saying, if you're blocking your inner life, everything about you is going to have a whole bunch of mechanisms, a bunch of them, well-oiled machine on how to defend whatever's coming your way, to defend you from really dealing with what's on the inside. So he had things like projection, which Jesus talked about, right? So the Pharisees were guilty of projection, a defense mechanism where they were so sick on the inside, they blocked it and tried to legalistically regulate every move of everybody else. Okay, so projection would be, I'm not dealing with my stuff, so all the stuff I'm not dealing with in me, I will see in you. Now imagine that projection showing up in your parenting life. Imagine that kind of projection showing up in your marriage. Imagine that kind of projection showing up in your church. That's why priests get so burnt out, is because, let's say they have a congregation of, 200. Well, they'll have at least, some percentage of projection people who all their unresolved issues with their father and mother comes out of the priest and his wife. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the world of projection. And when you're receiving it, it ain't fun. But it's sick in whichever little venue we're talking about, it's sick. Interesting, this is just an interesting thing, and I think in church life is important. Another one of Freud's defense mechanisms is something he calls reaction formation. Reaction formation, so projection was what you're not dealing with in here kind of gets splattered on the wall of somebody else. Reaction formation is sort of the demon you're battling, you're going to be in denial of, and then you're going to lead the crusade against all those demons. So a common one would be you struggle with sexual addiction and just being plagued with you can't even stop the noise and the images and pornography, but you're in denial of it. You would lead the crusade down Main Street of Christians against pornography. That's reaction formation. So is there anything wrong against having values and okay, there's room for that. Let's speak up. But when it comes from that sick place, it's a sick thing. And so we want to be aware of that. That we want to have a church that has values and we all of that. But we better be careful if there's sort of a renegade feel to that. In fact, Jesus said in Matthew 23, that litany of woes to the Pharisees, he says to those guys, you're whitewashed tombs, all shiny and bright on the outside, but on the inside full of dead men's bones. So the personal life of the museum is that something's dying and dying and dying on the inside, and the symptoms show. Now keep in mind, the museum person, the inner life blocked, not only comes out in symptoms in their relationships, but that's why addiction, whichever kind of addiction, substance, sexual, shopping, gambling, are particularly prone. Because if you're not feeling alive on the inside, your system will drag you to some place you could feel alive. Sexually, monetarily, whatever way. When we have our personal life as a hospital, what comes to mind? What comes to mind in this personal life? What might be true about that person's personal life? What would stand out? Person as a hospital. Okay. So the person definitely who is facing the reality of themselves, thankfully won't be judgmental of the reality in you. They'll have compassion on what's showing up in you. Imagine being that person. I'm humbled by the reality within me, so I'm compassionate when I encounter the reality in you. Imagine it happening in one person. Imagine that one person joining with other people and what kind of community that makes, right? The one thing I'd say certainly is that the personal life, like a hospital, finds some way, difficult, but finds some way of just dealing with reality. That's probably a huge distinctive for that person, is that they deal with reality, even the ugliest, toughest ones that just don't go away. That's why in the 12-step process, that's why step 1 is, I've come to admit that I'm powerless over that reality, and that my life's become unmanageable. So the whole 12-step success is based on our whole premise of facing reality. Interestingly, step 2 is, I believe there's a God who could restore me to sanity. Step 3 is, I turn my will over to that God, things like that. So definitely, something true about the person is they're facing reality. I would also say the person who gave treatment in the hospital in their personal life would not only admit that reality to themselves, but they'd admit that reality to at least one other human being. That can make a difference between a person who stays in their sickness and a person who's finding some path of recovery. And I would say also, because this person is letting reality in, they're going to be more prone toward finding truth. Okay, they could love more, yeah. Because reality is in them, which means love can happen too. And so true friendship, true intimacy, true closeness can happen. So I want to conclude by just painting a final scriptural picture of a great scripture very familiar to us in Luke chapter 18. It's the great parable when Jesus says, 2 men go to the temple to pray, right? One a Pharisee and one a tax collector. In our terms tonight, the scriptures would be rewritten a little. 2 men go to the temple to pray, one a museum and one a hospital. The scriptures go on to say, the museum says, I'm glad I give 1/10 of all I get, I'm glad I do this, I'm glad I do that, and then he looks at the tax collector, and I'm glad I'm not like that guy over there. And then the parable continues, and then the hospital, the tax collector says, or doesn't even say it at first, it says, can't even lift his head to heaven, beats his breast, and says, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus says, that guy goes home justified. That guy is going to be connected to me. That guy has hope. Denial of the museum, reality of the hospital. One very poised, one very messy. One very blocked, one very real. So we see in the scriptures that beautiful picture of this sort of crossroads that we have. I want to conclude by it's a kind of a weird, I just thought of it the other day, and maybe because we got a new TV recently and we have 3D glasses now. And my son is like super high tech, and both my kids are. I can barely use a remote, and they got it going, got 3D glasses, and I have this weird thought I had the other day, and that is, and I want to conclude, or sort of conclude, I want to make this point, I'm going to try to make this point, and the weird point is this, because my 3D glasses, the devil in 3D. I want us to think about the devil in 3D. 3D? Yep, 3D. And here's the 3Ds. The devil, diabolos, right? That's what it is in Greek, diabolos, which is, it could be translated, a couple different ways, but basically the one who divides. That's what diabolos means, the one who divides. So his whole mission of darkness is to divide. Thankfully, Jesus came to undo the works of the devil. Jesus came to integrate. Devil came to disintegrate. Right? So the one who divides. And I believe everything we looked at tonight, whether it be in the church, whether it be in our parenting, whether it be in our families, whether it be in our marriages, whether it be in our treatment of ourselves. The devil in 3D, the first D is he's trying to divide us away from reality, away from what's really going on, away from admitting it, away from expressing, away from being alive, over to this tempting division point of, oh, divide away from your heart. Oh, have denial. If you don't think about it, you don't have that problem. And so the devil is dividing right from the start, even our sense of ourselves. Any childhood injury we've ever had starts dividing us because we get confused on what's wrong with us and all that kind of stuff. The dividing, the devil is working all kinds of ways to divide. The way he tries to divide in our relationships. Even as simple as when we encounter differentness, whether it's in the church, or whether it's in our marriage, or with our kids. It's different, we get mad, and we stomp around, and we think everybody else is wrong, whatever it is. Division, division, division. So that first D is divide. The second D is, or the next two Ds are the ways that I believe he keeps us divided. Number one we talked about already, which is denial. If he can talk us into not facing the truth about ourselves, and the truth about whatever is confronting us, then his division works, and he keeps us powerless. So denial, so we have divide. Number two, we have denial. And the third D is the other way he keeps us divided, and that's despair. Despair would be that as I stay in denial, as I just keep things tucked away, I'm going to start believing that whatever God has, I don't think it's really going to reach me. Kind of like my favorite old cartoon when I was a kid was Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, or that little claymation. Still love it to this day. It would be like, despair would be like the land of misfit toys. Santa's never going to come here. A lot of people have spiritual lives like the misfit toys. The despair of saying, the grace won't reach what I got. And so this idea that denial and despair would keep us divided, I want to conclude with this one thought. And that was in that little parable when the museum and the hospital went up to pray. We heard what the museum said because he projected all over the place, had his defense mechanisms flying all over the place, judging all around him, and inflating himself. And then that hospital guy, the tax collector, prayed. Remember what he did? Barely could lift his head to heaven. He felt so heavy. But he said, have mercy on me, a sinner. In conclusion, I want to say this one thing. As we think about cultivating healthy families, as we think about cultivating in our own personal lives, as we think about cultivating in our marriages, in our parenting, in our church life, I believe, and I'd say this is the ultimate goal. It may sound so minor, but I believe it more than ever. The ultimate goal is our ability to pray for mercy. Our American mind starts saying, yeah, but what then? After I do that, what should I do? The ultimate goal is for us to pray for mercy. Mercy for what's going on in here, mercy for what's going on in the ones we love, mercy for the world around us. Because as we pray for mercy, something was true. The one who prayed, and we saw in that little parable, first guy didn't pray for mercy. If we reach the ultimate goal every day to pray for mercy, we reach the ultimate goal of facing reality, of coming from our heart, of being alive. Alive people pray for mercy. People who've gone dead on the inside don't. People in denial don't pray for mercy. People stuck in despair don't pray for mercy. The ultimate goal, that from our hearts to the heart of God, we would pray for mercy. The start of every treatment plan, the start of every miracle. And with that, simply say, in quote from St. John Chrysostom, when you find the gate to the heart, that's when you find the gate to the kingdom of heaven. So with that, I'll close. Thank you for your attention.
And the time is up, but just a couple thoughts and then we'll wrap up, just 5 minutes, just maybe a couple thoughts. Any thoughts, response?
You guys know Greek, but I understand the word mercy doesn't mean withholding punishment or penalty as much as it means loving kindness.
And they must.
So when we pray for Lord have mercy, we're asking for the Lord's loving kindness. That's not, don't punish me. Is that right?
Yes, I've heard it described as that the kirileison, kind of apparently better words than even the English words of mercy, is merciful one, do what you do. Merciful one, be who you are.
I think we've seen, right? What is it, direct translation in Greek? If you can.
Yes, amen.
It's a hard word to translate. Like, so,
Isn't the word
Father?
said?
Yeah, it's from Hesed, from the,
I believe the word mercy, eleison, comes from the word for oil. And the oil, like oil of grace. So when we say, Lord have mercy, we're asking the Lord for him to give us the grace of mercy.
I think Father or Bishop Papageorge, where it talks about that, uses that as a way to talk about it, but I think translating why is this not that way, but it's good to think of that way. But the thing is, we can get into the etymology, what it's about. The thing is, how do we practice that? We can have this conversation, intellectual conversation. How are you going to practice Edeimosini? How are you going to practice mercy? Be merciful. One more thought in the morning. Yes.
I just really appreciated how we live our life as a museum or as a hospital, and part of the, I think, movement towards orthodoxy will start off kind of as a museum, like let's look at this historical truths and stuff, and yet but the drawing is in the healing, being drawn in the healing of the hospital, and Christ wants to heal me. I don't just have to think differently and then my life will be different, but I actually need healing. But I realize that when I often talk to people, I talk to them as the Orthodoxy's museum, but what I'm feeling is that it's a hospital, and yet so that invitation to live that more fully, and to share with others, the experience of hospital, not the experience of museum.
Very well put. Well, again, I want to thank you for challenging us to be men and women, boys and girls that live in the real and experience the real and embrace the real. The reality is it takes money to bring great people here, like George, and I'd like to ask you to be generous tonight, that there was a handful of people that could not make it tonight. We had calls. But whatever you can offer, I might, of course, if you can put the basket in the back right in front of the icon there. There's a basket there. Can't say. So I'd like for you to pray about, think about what you can offer. That'd be great. George, it's a blessing to have you, as always. We love having you here. We love your creative ideas. We love the challenge you offer to all of us. With that, let's close with a prayer. And there's treats in the back, grapes and a little bit of drinks. And grapes are excellent. They're hormone filled with Christmas cookies are great. Father Michael, you want to close with a prayer?
Let's pray to the Lord. Lord, have mercy. Christ our God, because of our inability recognize the rock that our hearts have become. You came into the world and you showed us mercy, and you showed us compassion. And by this may we be healed by the love you have shown us, so that our hearts may become softened, may we become sensitive to your mercy to us, and by that we become merciful to others and to our families and our spouses and even ourselves. And may we live a real life that you want us to have with you, and may we just become vehicles, and may our hearts be softened, and may we become good soil that the seed of your good news may be planted in us.
Thank you so much. A beautiful night. Enjoy the back. Thank you.
Yes.